In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a new video out of existing videos. Now, it's best to have, this is the end of a very long process. Usually the actually clicking buttons in SPSS is the thing you do after you have used the codebook to identify variables that will help you build a variable that operationalizes your construct. So what that means is you have an idea, you have this concept that you would like to be able to understand, and you need to somehow figure out a way to find information out about that concept. You create a construct. So that's a specific variable, in a sense, an idea of what that specific variable will be based on existing information that you have available. So once you've figured out what your construct is going to be, that's that process of going from concept to construct is operationalization. So an example of this could be something like, say, purchasing power. So how are you going to determine purchasing power based on this kind of a survey? Well, if the survey had some variables on income and some survey had some variables on where the person lived, and you had some additional data that allowed you to determine relative inflation in different places, or cost of living, relative cost of living, you could enter a new variable that had that relative cost of living, and then do some math with all of those variables to come up with this purchasing power variable. We're not doing anything that complex here, but that's just an idea of going from an idea, do you need more money to live in one place than another, to this construct of purchasing power. You've operationalized that. So we're going to do a couple of things here. So first of all, once you've identified which variables will help build your construct, you need to do some descriptive statistics on those to see if this is really going to work. So I'm going to do some descriptive statistics on two variables. One is called HRSI and one is called SPHRSI. And these are variables that are the respondents, how many hours they worked, and the SPHRSI is how many hours their spouse worked. So I'm going to display variable names, and I'm going to sort alphabetically because I know these by their variable names, and it's easier to find them this way. So H. Now they're actually right next to each other in the survey, so if I put it back to survey order, I'd be more likely to find these very quickly, but I'm going to do it this way. SP, LMNOP, here we go, SP, SPHRS1. Okay, so I know these are the variables that I'm looking for. I said HRSI, I meant HRS1. So those are the two variables that I want to look at. And here we go. We had more data for the respondent than for their spouses, so that means not all of them had spouses to answer that question. So minimum of 1 hour a week, maximum of 89 hours a week in both of those, with the means that are very similar, 40 hours, 41 hours. So I know this is a nice continuous variable, and I'm going to create a new variable in which I add these together to come up with a how many hours did a couple work together. And that's a construct of sort of couple busyness that I've operationalized this idea, this concept of which I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to come up with a variable that I can use to answer other questions on the impact of how busy with work a couple is and how it might affect other things in their lives. All right, so now that I know that, I am going to come over here to transform, and I can use the transform menu that I find in my output, or I can use the transform menu that I find in my data window. Makes no difference. All right, I am going to compute a variable. My target variable is going to be called couple HRS, couple hours, and this is going to be a really basic numeric expression. I'm going to add two things, and again I'm going to display my variable names, and I'm going to sort alphabetically so that I know that I'm getting the exact right thing. So there's my spouse hours, and I click that to move it there, and then I'm going to use the plus, and then I'm going to scroll my way to HRSI, should be right about there. There we go. And that's going to become my my new variable. Now there's some things you can do. You can do some optional case selections and conditions. There's some other functions that you can have, because if it's not straight math, you'll need to find some functions for that, just like we do in Excel. But this is all I need here. Click OK. I have no errors, so I know my variable worked, but I'm also going to pop over here, variable view, scroll all the way down to here. It doesn't have because I created it that way, I need to go ahead and give it a label. Total hours worked by a couple. There we go. All right, and then I want to get myself a descriptive statistic on that. So I'm going to reset, and I know it's at the very bottom, so just come straight on down. Okay, and we see that it ranges from a minimum of 16 hours to a maximum of 149 hours, with an average number of hours worked by a couple of 82 hours. So that is creating a new variable out of existing variables. There are other things that we could do that might be a little bit more complex. It is possible to create new variables out of things that are not necessarily quite so straightforward as this. So for example, this particular data set has a lot of variables that deal with attending cultural things, I guess is the best way to put it. So attending, what am I looking for? Here we go. Attending an art museum, natural history museum, visiting a zoo, science museum, public library. I would like to come up with an index that gives me that operationalizes this idea of museum and library attendance. And so I'm going to actually add all of these up, and that will create a pretty decent looking index. So I'm going to come here so I can look at this. This is just telling me what my value labels are. This is a continuous variable, so we don't know. It's not like it's categories of never, once to 5 times, or things like that. We'd have to do this a little bit differently if that were the case. But I'm just going to add these up just like I did with the other one. So transform, compute variable. I'm going to reset so that I can start fresh, and I know that I need to display my variable names and sort alphabetically. Let me get down here to my VISs, VIS art, and so forth. Here we go. All right, so my new variable is going to be muslib. Hey, that's kind of funny, muslib. I'm going to leave it like that. Muslib at museum library attendance, and that's going to be viz art plus vislib plus viszoo. Oops, I didn't move it over. That happens. I just backspace over my plus, click my zoo, click it over. All right. So I've got the art museum, I've got the library, I've got the zoo. This is VisSci is a science museum, and Natural History Museum will be the last one I do. All right, say that's okay. I don't have any errors, so I know that's all right. I come back into my data real fast, variable view, and there it is, and I can go ahead and label it so that I know. Now, I really should have done some descriptive statistics on all of those variables that I used, but I just held off. I'm going to do it all at the same time now. So analyze, descriptive statistics, just doing descriptives instead of frequencies because this is a continuous variable. I might do frequencies and see if it's a normal curve as part of our next exercise in our lab. Okay, reset, and I'm going to just, there is actually a way to set this so that by default it's always alphabetical and by that, but that's not often how I do it when I'm doing it myself, so I'm not changing it in my actual own version of SPSS here. All right, so there's the 5 variables we used to combine, and then I'm going to put that back to file order, since I know these are at the end of file order. There we go. And I'm going to check and see if there's anything else I want as part of my descriptives. Not really, so I'm just going to say OK. And there we go. A range of 0 to 30 attending an art museum, 0 to 80 for a public library, 0 to 20 for natural history, 0 to 50 for science museum, 0 to 95 for zoo. Mean number of visits, the only one that's greater than 1 is zoo and public library. So I've created a new variable, and this is kind of fun. Let's just for the heck of it, because we can do this stuff in SPSS, even if you don't know how yet. This new variable, I'm going to bet it's highly related to the number of children that the respondents have. So I'm going to do analyze descriptive statistics. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do, what should I do here? I'm looking for correlations. Yeah, correlate. Bivariate correlation. And I'm going to correlate number of children, which I know is right down here somewhere. I thought it was right about there. I'm not quite sure where. I'm going to get back to that in just a second. Instead, I'm going to scroll all the way down here into museum or library attendance, and then I'm also going to display my variable names and sort alphabetically like I normally would. The particular variable I'm looking for is called child, so that's why I just quickly popped it back to a way that I could just search for childs. There we go. So I'm just going to see if there's a correlation between these two. Okay. Yeah, not what I expected at all. It's a really low correlation, and the relationship between museum or library attendance and the number of children is low and negative, which means as the number of children go up, museum or library attendance goes down. That was unexpected, but it was also kind of fun. It may mean there's something a little bit off with the data. It may mean that my concepts are wrong in the first place. It may mean that there's something off with my new variable that I put together, my museum or library attendance. But I think it's probably something that's off with my my original hypothesis. I'm just flat out wrong, is what I've discovered here. So anyway, that is how you create new variables using SPSS. There are much more complex ways to create variables, and sometimes if you create variables using scales, things like agree to disagree, you have to pay close attention to whether in all questions those numbers are going in the same direction. So, 1 means agree, highly agree, 2 means agree, 0 means neutral. You have to make sure those are heading in the same direction. If not, sometimes you have to do some flipping around, some recoding variables to get things all going the same direction. You can sum stuff up. You can create means instead of, so if it was, you had a bunch of attitude questions, instead of adding them all together and coming up with a single variable that might range from 0 to 25 or 1 to 25, you would instead, actually it'd be 5 to 25 if it were a 5-point attitude scale. You could instead just take some means, so that instead you've now got or divide by 5 when you're done, so that you've got a single representative variable that tells you everything from the other variables. It's just still on a 1 to 5 scale as opposed to a 5 to 25 scale. That all just uses that, that transform compute variable or math equations here, very similar to how things work in Excel or on a piece of paper. So that's creating new variables in SPSS.